Alright, so a couple of days ago, the Nydus Worm and the Nydus Network received a pretty significant buff in the multiplayer version of StarCraft 2. And while I did mention it during my balance update video, the one that I posted about a week or so ago, it's really hard to judge how good something has become just by simply reading the numbers. And while it looked very, very promising, I wasn't entirely sure how good it would truly be. Well, now in the new multiplayer season, I have played a couple dozen games with those new multiplayer changes that are now alive. And let me tell you, I think it's gotten to the point where the Nydus Worm might actually be a little bit too powerful. Let me explain. I've got a couple games for you right here of matches that I've played recently, and there's no denying that it is extremely fun to play, but it also looks very, very difficult to stop. Now, obviously, it's gonna take some time for all of the races to figure out what the correct counter is, but there's no denying that the Nydus Network and the Nydus Worm are actually viable right at this point in StarCraft 2. But I personally wouldn't be surprised if they're gonna like scale it back just a little in one of the upcoming patches as well. Anyways, what I want to do today is show you a couple of games that I've played recently. I went for a variety of strats. This is the most, I guess, like classic version of going for a Nydus all-in off of 2 bases in Zerg vs. Zerg. In all of those games, I will be the player that goes by the name of Dronation. I like changing my nickname from time to time just because, you know, stream sniping and whatnot is quite common in StarCraft. So changing your nickname usually does make it a little bit harder to open up the stream while you're playing against your opponent as well. So I like to change it from time to time. So my account is called Dronation right at this point. So what I've done, I've opened up the most recent balance patches to StarCraft, and I want to quickly go over the Nydus Network and the Nydus Worm changes that went live since last November. So in the past, about a year or so ago, for about a year, we had the Nydus Worm that was completely invulnerable while it was emerging, and while if you were clicking fast enough, you could go for all-ins that were rather powerful, it always seemed a little bit backwards. I mean, you could see the Nydus Worm going up in your main, but it wasn't clickable while it was emerging, and it just simply... You know, you had to like prepare units and stand around it, I suppose, to try and deal with it. Because as soon as it popped, queens would go out and it'd start transfusing. And it was just... It didn't feel like StarCraft, okay? It felt a little bit weird that you couldn't like attack an emerging unit and that you had to wait like the 10 seconds or so it takes for it to fully come out. So they've changed it in patch 4.7.1, the one that went live right after BlizzCon wrapped up. They made the following changes. So the Nydus Network cost decreased from 150-200 to 150-150. Nydus Worm cost decreased from 100-100 to 50-50. So combined, the Nydus Network and the Nydus Worm became significantly cheaper. However, Nydus Worms are no longer invincible when emerging. Now they have 6 armor while emerging from the ground. That was, in its own, already a pretty significant change. And the idea that Blizzard had in mind is that they didn't want to see it so often when it came to like 2-base all-ins, for example, but they wanted it to be like a transport tool near the end of the game. So, for example, you have a bunch of swarm hosts, they want you to pop them out, for example, at the 3rd base, and then like one at the main base, and you just pop them in and out, and you just do a lot of damage, and your opponent can't keep up. That was kind of the thought process behind it. Well, there's a couple more changes that they've made just a couple days ago, and that is the following. So first off, the Nydus Worm health increased from 200 to 300. The Nydus Worm armor has been decreased from 6 to 5. However, and these are the 3 really powerful changes, the Nydus Network and Nydus Worm initial unload delay decreased from 0.36 to 0.18. The Nydus Network and Nydus Worm unload period changed from 0.36 to 0.18. And the Nydus Network and Nydus Worm load period changed from 0.18 to 0.09. Alright, so what does any of that mean? Well, here's what it means. The initial units that pop out of the Nydus Worm pop out significantly quicker, twice as fast than they used to in the past. On top of that, all units that come after that also pop out twice as quick as they used to. And then last but not least, you can now also use it as a retreating tool, because the Nydus Worm loads up substantially quicker than it used to in the past. And you'll see that here in just a second as well. So this is just your regular good old Zerg vs. Zerg I've decided to go ahead and play a 2-base push here. I want to go for the Nydus Worm, of course. My opponent knows that I'm on 2 bases. He knows that I don't have a third. I'm doing a little bit of scouting here, trying to figure out what it is he's going for. And I see the timing right here of the lair. And I know that I've probably got the upper hand here when it comes to tech. Now, this is a much more, I guess, like orthodox way of playing a Nydus Worm, okay? This is what people used to do when it was invulnerable while emerging. So basically what you do is you make the Nydus Worm, you pop it into your opponent's main base, and you cross your fingers and hope they don't find it. I wanted to show this one first because it is much more, I guess, normal when it came to like the previous Nydus Worms. It's the much more classic variant of a Nydus Worm off of 2 bases. And the thing is, this kind of thing is not very popular anymore, or at least it wasn't popular for a little while. Just because if your opponent has vision of the Nydus Worm, they could usually just kill it. Right? They could just usually pull a bunch of units and then go ahead and kill it. However, if they don't see it, the obvious advantage is that your units are going to be inside of his main base, and if you can then take control of the top of their ramp, it's going to be extremely powerful. So here we go. Nydus Worm is currently emerging inside of their base. I'm sending the rest of my units across as well. My opponent has a hard time finding it, and I wanted you to pay attention here how quickly the units pop out. You seeing that? It is almost a comical animation. It's almost a comical animation the way it looks when it's spewing out units, but it unloads so much quicker than it once did. Now, in the meantime, at home, I am rallying all of my hatcheries towards the Nydus Worm, and you can see I'm continuously unloading the units as well. But the strength of this is obviously that you can take the queens that you usually use defensively to the engagement here as well. And I managed to push back my opponent, and I managed to take control of his main base. For obvious reasons, that is very strong. I've also put up a Nydus Worm at my opponent's third base. So since it's only 50 minerals, 50 gas, it is not that big of a commitment anymore like it used to be in the past. So it used to be 100-100 for each individual Nydus Worm. Nowadays, it's 50-50 for each individual Nydus Worm, and the network itself is cheaper too, so it's much less of a commitment. And usually that does put me at least in a little bit more of a confident state, where I don't feel so bad putting up another Nydus Worm closer to one of my opponent's bases. And that's obviously exactly what the idea behind this was. So I've got a couple roaches going to town right now in my opponent's main base. I've got a couple roaches that actually just got picked off over at his third base as well. But we're slowly but surely picking a lot of this off, and he's basically trying to now get some lucky corrosive biles to hopefully push all of this back. But as you may have already looked at right now, or you may have already realized, that is going to be very difficult to achieve, because my economy is just much stronger as I took control of his main. Once again, sending some reinforcements there to my opponent's third, just trying to force some of that away as well. But you can see supply-wise, it is just heavily in favor for me right now. So I would say this is like the classic way of playing the Nydus Worm, right? And this definitely is stoppable as long as you see that the Nydus Worm is going up inside of your main base. This just simply requires game presence and you know, minimap vision, I suppose, right? As long as you know that your opponent is trying to put the Nydus in your base, you should be in a really good spot, just simply holding it as well. Now my opponent decides to stay in this game for as long as he possibly can. I get a couple more drone kills there. It's 10 versus 42 right now. And he's still dropping when it came to that counter. You can see that eventually he should be over a run. Alright, so here's game number 2. This is another match that I recently played, and I think this one already shows you what is possible. And I think this is already showing you a pretty legitimate strategy that should be able to work at a higher level of play as well. This time around, I'm on New Repugnancy, one of the new maps, and my opponent is not a Zerg. He is, in fact, a Protoss. Now, I've decided to cruise through the game at ×4 speed for now. I'll slow it down in just a little bit. My early game build is just a super standard roach-based opener, so it's mostly focused on 2 bases. I do think I get like a third hatchery here as well, although I'm not entirely sure on that, but it's a very normal game to play when you're playing ZVP. So yeah, there we go. I do decide to get my third base up. But all things considered, nothing is really out of the ordinary here. I recognize that my opponent is likely going for a Stargate opener after not seeing the Warp Gate research, and I managed to get the kill right here on the first Adept as well. Alright, so obviously since my opponent is going for a Stargate opener, I've decided to do a heavy focus on queens. So I've already got 3 queens here. And I'm gonna add up, I think, to like 8 or so, maybe a little bit less. But I start adding on a pretty large amount of queens. And the thing is, no one's gonna be caught off guard, right? If you do like a heavy focus on queens in Zerg versus Zerg, yeah, your opponent is likely going to be at least a little suspicious. But in Zerg versus Protoss and in Zerg versus Terran in particular, it's very common for Zerg players to focus on a lot of queens just because they're your best early game option for anti-air, right? And obviously in the Zerg versus Zerg matchup, there's not a lot of units early on that need to be killed that can fly, other than, I guess, overlords. But anyways, I've got a lot of queens here. I've got a lot of roaches. I've got roach speed coming up right now as well. And my opponent is going for what seems to be a normal kind of playstyle as well. I don't know about his third base. I haven't really scouted for that because I don't really care. I'm going to do the same thing anyway. However, I'm making a bit of a change here. And this is where I think things may become a little bit too powerful. Rather than going for one Nydus Worm, which is what I went for in the previous game, or one Nydus Worm at the time, in this game, I've decided to go for 2 Nydus Worms. Now, I'm going to once again slow it down to the regular in-game speed. However, 2 Nydus Networks is really, really strong. When you think about it, right? Most of the time, a Protoss player is going to assume that you're going to push him with, for example, Swarmhost or Roaches or Zerglings or whatever at his most vulnerable, his most far away base, right? And in this case, that's going to be his third. That does mean that usually the majority of the Protoss army is going to be located at the third as well. Now, here we go. I've got the Overseer coming up. My opponent is playing a really quick Colossus-based opener. Not ideal against this, but I've got 2 Nydus Worms right now going up inside of his main base. So his army is going to be located over at the third. He might be able to kill one of them. I can put another one down at his third once again, now with the vision that I got from that Overseer. And you can imagine, look, one Nydus Worm almost goes down, but there's not a way that he could ever kill that second one. It's got so many hit points. And the units pop out so quickly that as soon as like one of them goes up, even if it's only got a little bit of hit points, I should be able to transfuse it as long as I put in my queens on the other side of the map first as well. So we absolutely smash the amount of stuff that my opponent has over here. We pick up the majority of the scary units right from the get-go. And the thing is, this execution isn't even that good. I was looking at this. I think this is one of the first games where I've decided to go for 2 Nydus Networks. What if I put one at his third base and one in his main? Where is he gonna defend? Like, if he doesn't have 8 gateways to warp in with, at that point he's just not gonna stop the one in the main. And if he decides to commit his army at the third base, which is where most Protosses are located, he's obviously not, like, he can't kill both locations at once. Alright, so I've shown you a Zerg versus Zerg, as well as a Zerg versus Protoss. What about a Zerg versus Terran? Okay, this is usually the matchup where Nydus Networks are not very common. However, what's better than 2 Nydus Networks? It's almost comical, but 3 Nydus Networks, of course. Now, I'm not entirely sure if that's true, but in this game, I decided to mess around a little bit and try out 3 Nydus Worm instead. Now, if you're a Terran player, I highly advise you to look away for a little bit because it's probably going to be really triggering. Because in this game, my opponent manages to get a stupid amount of worker kills. I play very sloppily in this game. I think this was one of the last games that I played that day. And usually, I stream for about 6 hours at a time. Usually, like, the 5th and, like, the 6th hour of the stream are just a little shaky as far as my level of play goes, okay? I just start losing focus, and usually that's the point at which I start losing quite a couple matches. So look, the first couple Hellions here are gonna move across the map. Well, you will. There you go. He is gonna move across the map, manage to get into my base, and he is gonna be able to get himself a nice amount of worker kills. Then at the same time, there's also a Banshee following this up towards my third base here in just a little bit. And that one is also gonna start getting a couple of kills. Then at the same time, there's the Banshee, by the way. There's more and more Hellions assembling to once again head into my natural and to deal a lot of damage. So I lose a stupid amount of workers here. It's just super sloppy by me. This shouldn't be happening at this point in the game. But the one thing that I do have going for me is that he sacrifices all of the units in order to achieve this, right? So he's got 23 drones killed at this point in the game. It's 47 Harvesters versus only 26. He's got 3 command centers done, 3 orbital commands. His income is gonna be ridiculous. However, I figured, you know what? May as well try and put all of my eggs in one basket, and rather than GG out right now, I may as well go ahead and go for the triple Nydus Worm play instead. So here we are. I've got 3 Nydus Worms coming up. Now, it's mostly gonna be Queens and Roaches here for the time being. Do finally manage to kill that Banshee here as well. But this is, for obvious reasons, a really bad situation to be in if you're Zerg. However, I've got Queens. And as I pointed out in the past when someone in a Q&A asked, Lowko, what do you think is the strongest unit in the game? I genuinely think it's the Queen. The Queen is the perfect early game defense unit, and they're super, super powerful. Once again, a couple of Hellions make their way towards my third. Do you think he was done killing units yet? Not quite. Not quite. I'm gonna end up losing, once again, a whole bunch of drones. So while I managed to clean this up eventually, I'm obviously in a pretty rough position here. But while this is going on, my Overseer made its way across the map, and I'm basically planting down little Nydus worms everywhere. And look, since he threw away all of those units earlier, he cannot actually even stop a single one. Look, that one's still emerging right now. All 3 of my Nydus worms go up. The queens pop out. I've got more and more of them making their way right now towards the Nydus worm. I can start unloading not only in the main base if I want to. I can put the units back into the worm super easily and start going to town on everything that's over here as well, right? I can easily retreat and start fighting another location as well. The queens and the roaches just simply overwhelm the amount of stuff that he has. And after killing, I believe, 27 drones, my opponent decides to leave the game. I don't know what to say. This is such a dirty game. He made all the right moves, and while his macro obviously started slipping really, really badly here at the end, even if he would have macroed perfectly there, I'm not exactly sure how easy it would have been for him to stop it. Now, I think 3 Nydus networks might be a little excessive, but it certainly does have potential. I feel like I've been recording this entire video with like a smug smile on my face. It just feels really dirty, but also really good to put down the Nydus worm in your opponent's main base and then just pop in and out and deal so much damage as well. So I want to show you 2 more games. This one is probably the most legitimate game that I've played with Nydus worms. So this one starts off with a little bit of aggression as well. I mean to go for a 2-base all-in if I'm not mistaken. I may once again get the 3rd hatchery, but it's mostly similar to that second game of ZVP that I showed you, or the second game that I showed you today, the Zerg versus Protoss. So the thing in this game is that my opponent manages to shut down my initial bit of aggression, right? I decide to go for the push, and he absolutely cleans it up with ease. However, at that point, we transition towards much more of a macro-focused Zerg versus Protoss, but I've still got the Nydus worms left over from earlier, and that's where I personally really still enjoy playing them as well. So he decides to go for a double Stargate-based opener. I got my Nydus network coming up. He scouts it right here as well. I put the worm behind the mineral line. I get a couple queens out, but it doesn't really work, okay? So, this is where we are right now. So, at this point, this is one of the first times that this happened to me. I mean, I won all of the other games at this point, so I wasn't sure what to do. Still think I could have gone with 1 Nydus over here and then 1 over there, and I think I probably would have been able to still overwhelm him. But regardless, at this point in the game, I am stuck at a very solid amount of queens. I did lose a couple of them. I lost 2 there in total, and I obviously am certainly behind right now, but I've still got 3 bases and I've still got a pretty strong army as well. So I want to go back to my vision during this game, and I want to show you what's going on here. So I think this is the intended purpose of the Nydus worm, okay? So I think this is awesome. So what I've got here is a Nydus network approaching his 3rd base, and I'm going to bring the queens along on this engagement as well. So normally, a Roach Ravager-based army doesn't have any anti-air, right? And usually, if you want to get anti-air, you're going to have to get Hydras out, but Hydras take a while to finish. So if you can bring queens along for a relatively affordable price, and obviously they share upgrades with roaches as well, you should be able to zone this kind of unit composition quite nicely. So since I've got queens for the early game defense, and I can now also use them in the offense relatively easily, I've actually come to really like this. So I think what a legitimate build might very well entail in the end is a Zerg player going for like a 2 to 3 base, maybe double Nydus network play. If that gets held, you can still use the Nydus worms later on to, for example, go for Roach Queen. And what about like Roach Queen Swarm Host? What if I bring Swarm Host to this as well? If I can put like 1 Nydus worm right over here, and then I can like push him into the main base, and I can unleash the locust at 1 location and then go to the next. There's so much potential there, and I think it's really, really cool because this is such a fun way of playing Zerg. All of a sudden, your army that was immobile in the past, I mean, Swarm Hosts are pretty slow, Queens are very slow, obviously. That army all of a sudden becomes mobile, and you can actually use them quite confidently. Now, that is very much so something that I'm still working on. I managed to, by the way, get my opponent's third base killed there. So rather than committing to his aggression, well, I do a bit of a cheeky move here. But rather than trying to push into his natural, which is what I think he assumed, I decide to get on out of there as soon as the Phoenixes show up. And did you see how quickly that army just retreated? It's ridiculously quick. It's super, super quick. Anyways, my opponent wanted me to push into his natural right there. I decide to retreat instead and just sort of give him the benefit of the doubt while still building up my own economy here as well. So, my whole mindset in this game right now is not allowing my opponent a third. Okay, that's what I'm going for here. I do not want him to get a third base up, and as long as I keep track of where his army is located, I should be able to force him to mine out the 2 bases that he does have at this point in the game, right? So if I keep track of roughly what's going on, I can do little counterattacks with roaches and whatnot in several different locations, and I have my queens inside of the Nydus to pop out at any given moment to reinforce my roaches as well. It's, oh man, this is so cool. I really enjoy this. And while I'm not entirely sure if like maybe it takes time before people will figure out what's going on and how to counter this kind of thing, there certainly is a lot of potential here. So I've split up my army. A couple roaches right here is natural. I want to go after the third base here as well. Managed to successfully pick that off. And while my roaches will end up going down, I gladly sacrifice a bunch of my roaches here in favor of getting myself a whole lot of damage done. I know if my opponent doesn't get a third up, and I do once again see another Nexus there, but I know if he doesn't get a third up, I'm going to be in a great spot. My roaches can get out of the Nydus very easily, but also into the Nydus once again very easily. So I decide to retreat there. But as long as he doesn't get a third base up, he's eventually going to run out of money. Now, in this game, he was showing me a very heavy focus on Phoenix, and I wasn't sure if Queens alone were going to cut it. So I decided to add on Hydras. I think in most other games, though, I would go for Nydus, or for Nydus with Swarm Host right now. Already, Nydus Swarm Host is something that a lot of Zerg pros have been doing over the last year or so. The advantage of it is that you only really need like 60 drones. You don't really need that much economy. Like 3 bases is more than enough for Nydus Network and or for Swarm Host play rather. So I think if you already are going for like a 2-base push and you're already at low economy, adding on towards the third base is going to be easy, but going up to like Lurkers or Brute Lords is going to be really hard to pull off. Anyways, my opponent decides to push in right here, and I do not realize this. This is obviously poor scouting on my part. I'm gonna try and go after this army here as well, but there's no denying that I definitely am taking a heavy amount of damage here. The thing is, though, my army is still really strong. And just like with Swarm Host-based compositions, you don't need a very large economy to be able to max out. Roach Queen is actually surprisingly easy to max out with. Anything based around Roach really is, but while it's not as quick, I guess, to max out as Swarm Hosts, it certainly is very valuable. So I decided to go for a couple bases here. I figured one is likely gonna die, so I may as well go for 2. Maybe I can get something out, but look, my Roach Hydra army is moving across the map. My Queens are there faster. My Queens are there quicker than the rest of the army. So here we go. They fight each other. Or they join each other, rather, to fight against this Protoss army. And he absolutely gets shut down. Now, this was a really fun match. I mean, I think I may have been able to deal a lot more damage if I went double Nydus Network at the beginning. But this is such a relatively low commitment strategy to transition to watch like a much more macro-focused mid-game as well with a Roach Ravager, Queen, Hydra. Like, it's so fun. The Queens can actually join the engagement. Alright, one more, okay? This is the final one I'll show you. This is actually the final game that I played with Nydus Worms so far as well, although I'm sure I'll do a lot more of that today on the live stream as well. By the way, for those of you unfamiliar, I stream on Monday through Saturday, 2 to 8 p.m. CET usually. That's my standard time on Twitch, so that's twitch.tv/LowkoTV for those of you curious. But this is the final game that I played with Nydus Worms so far. And I think this is probably one of the best 2-base executions that I've done so far. So not to like pat myself on the back, I just am aware of the fact that I'm not like always playing it as on point as I would like to. So in this game, I decide to go for something a little bit different. So I believe I go 2 Nydus Worms, 2 Nydus Networks rather in this game. Yeah, so there we go, 2 Nydus Networks. And what I decide to do is go for, I guess, a push at both of his main and the third at the same time. So I'm essentially forcing my opponent to choose. So if I go back here on the normal speed, the in-game speed that it was played at, I want to show you what goes down here. So my double Nydus Networks are emerging right now, and I decide to put one at his main and one at his third. And this is where things become very shaky. Now, obviously, this is gonna require some firm decision making, but he has to decide where he wants to go, and I'll show you his decision making here in just a little bit after this game finishes. But look, I end up dealing a bunch of damage here at his third. I get more Nydus worms inside of his main, and I decide to just pop in all of my units once again and start fighting the main instead. Queens can go ahead and transfuse the Nydus worms as well. I've got a couple roaches that are finishing up the third. They're once again gonna go inside of the Nydus worm too. I'm gonna unload those inside of his main base, and you can see the amount of damage we just dealt in a matter of seconds is ridiculous. That was such a rough fight to actually deal with for him. He has to make the decision if he wants to defend the third or the main. Now, I just want to go back, and this is where experience comes into play, okay? So I just want to go back to the point before my first two Nyduses emerge. So look, I want to show you the full vision here. So let me speed up to the point where the Nydus worms go up. So my opponent does have a pretty decent amount of supply, right? I'm a little bit ahead in supply, so I think I macroed just a little bit better. But he overdroned clearly on the 3 bases, right? So maybe this isn't the best example on whether or not it's like IMBA or too powerful or whatever. But look, I just want to show you his decision making. So I put up 1 Nydus worm in the main and 1 at the third. Here's his army. He's got vision of what's going on, right? So he's got vision of what's going on. Initially, his response is a little slow, but now we have 2 Nydus worms going up on his side of the map. And I want you to pay attention to his army positioning. He's like, okay, Queens, go take it out. Go to the third. There's a Nydus worm over there. No, go to the main. Go to the third. Go to the main. What? Where do we go? And eventually, he does... No, oh, he turns it back around once again as well. Eventually, he does decide to try and fight both of them, so he ends up fighting none of them. And, yeah, I'm not entirely sure what the correct response is. Obviously, in case of this match, you don't want to go over, like, you know, you don't want to go up to 50 drones when your opponent is playing 2-base Roach. It's just way too much. But there's no denying that this is certainly a strategy that's viable right now. And I'm personally wondering if it's maybe not just a little bit too powerful. It's been fun, though. It's been a lot of fun. Now, here's the thing. The Nydus Network, if you make 2 of them, that's still 300 minerals and 300 gas. Plus, on top of that, you have to make the worms. That's 400, 400. That is a very significant commitment, okay? That's like the cost of like 2 immortals, right? If your opponent is good enough and he scouts what's going on, and I think that's probably the real counter to this, Protoss, Terran, and Zerg players alike are going to have to try and scout to see what's going on. If they scout what's happening, they should be able to split up their units accordingly and deal with this kind of push just fine, right? If you're, say, for example, a Protoss player and you see, hey, it's a double Nydus Network play, I'm likely gonna be fine and I don't really have to worry too much if I split up my Immortals in one base and then the other half of the Immortals in the other base, right? If you're playing a normal style, if you split up your army, you should be good. However, what a lot of Protoss players have defaulted to over the last couple of years, I suppose, in ZVP, is that they don't really need to scout. As long as they see that it's not a Spire play, and a lot of Protoss players don't even scout for that because it's very, very uncommon at this point in the meta. As long as they see that it's a 3rd base for Zerg, they keep track of the potential 4th bases as well, and they know it's not a Spire, usually it's fine, right? Usually they can just sort of do whatever they like. However, it seems like Zerg has a 2-base all-in that's very powerful, that does get 3 hatcheries, but it's essentially a 2-base all-in. Yeah, if it goes unscouted, it deals a lot of damage. Now, a lot of players are already leaning towards saying that it's IMBA. Maybe it is a little bit too strong, but I personally have got the feeling that at the very highest level of play, players are likely going to be able to scout around quite comfortably and see what's happening. For example, if you are a Protoss player, you're going to have to... For example, even if you don't see the Nydus worms, right? You don't see the Nydus networks going up. Just the idea of your opponent not having full saturation at the third at a certain point in the game is obviously already a big indication that this kind of push can be happening, right? And it's just going to require more scouting for both Terran, Protoss, and Zerg to figure out if something like this is going down. And I think time will probably sort itself out, and I think probably people will figure out how to counter this quite comfortably. But at the very least right now, I encourage you to give this kind of strategy a try if you play Zerg, because it is a lot of fun. I hope you enjoyed watching this video. If you did, make sure you hit that like button down below. And if you want to see more, make sure you hit that subscribe button so you get notifications as soon as future videos go live. A special shout out to the Patreon supporters. You guys are awesome. And also, if you want to buy my merch, www.lowko.tv/merch. But for now, I want to thank you for watching. Have an amazing day. Do not forget to smile alright, and I will see you once again in the next one.